Good afternoon. My name is Shannon and I'm a member of the Education Committee. I'm excited to welcome you to our next session, Breaking Down Barriers, Alternative Paths to Legal Practice. Historically, moving from one state to another to practice physical therapy was a linear and at times laborious process for the licensee. This session will address all of the alternate pathways to legal practice that have emerged in the past few years, as well as information on the newly updated telehealth policy paper. The speakers for this session are Craig Miller, Stephen Scherger, Grant Minix, and Sharice Smith. You can find their bios on the event app. They have valuable information to share, and we also encourage your participation. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A portion, the members of the Education Committee will provide you with a microphone. Please abide by the ground rules in the program notebook so more attendees have a chance to ask questions. At the end of the session, please scan the QR code to complete your evaluation. We appreciate your feedback. Now, I turn the presentation over to our speakers.
Good afternoon. We're nearing the home stretch. How you guys doing? Good. My name is Sharice Smith, and I am the current chair of the Ethics and Legislation Committee. And today we're going to talk to you about breaking barriers, alternate paths to legal practice. And any of you who may have been licensed, this recently happened to me a year ago, licensed in one state, wishing to practice in another. Over the past 20 years, I've probably had to go through some different hoops, jump through some different hoops sometimes to be able to legally practice in another state. Now, a lot of us in this room are probably pretty familiar with the compact at this point. That was sort of our first way to be able to have an alternate path to practicing legally in another state. But with the advent of COVID, some other paths to legal practice have popped up, and we're also going to talk more in depth about those today. Universal licensure recognition, which you may have heard of, may be familiar with, and then telehealth registries. Now, these kind of came about with COVID, but they seem to be staying around, so we're hoping to give you a good bit of information about all three of these alternate paths to practicing legally. I am very honored to be here with my distinguished panel, two of which are from our Ethics and Legislation Committee, Craig Miller, and our newest board of director, Steve Scherger. And we are very honored to have a special guest with us who I'd like to introduce to you. This is Grant Minix. He is a policy analyst for the Council of State Governments Interstate Compact Commission, or Center for Interstate Compact, sorry. Grant provides education. Grant and his organization provide education, outreach, and technical assistance to state policymakers and professional stakeholders in the development and administration of interstate compacts. And I know Grant has been intimately connected with the respiratory therapy compact in particular as of late. So thank you for joining us today, Grant. And we also just wanted, before we get started, to acknowledge the members of our Ethics and Legislation Committee. All of them that are here, I believe, are up on the stage. And Jean Wolford, I don't believe she is in the audience, but she's from New Mexico. Bettina Brown is from New Mexico, and Jean Wolford is from Maryland. She is here at the conference. And we'd also like to thank our fearless leader, Michelle Thornman, who has been our board liaison, and then Leslie and Rich, as always, for their support. And before we start, we just want to kind of get your feel on whether or not your jurisdiction has a universal recognition law in place for physical therapy. And we'll wait for some of you. If you don't know, that's okay too. That's why you're here. We're going to teach you all about it. give it another minute. All right, it looks like the majority of you are saying no, and a close second is I'm not sure. The reality is that there are 19 jurisdictions that do have a universal recognition law in place. You're going to hear more about that here in a few moments. So I am going to first turn it over to our expert from the Council of State Governments, Grant.
Thank you, Sharice, for that introduction. I got to say, it's humbling being up here with the panel that was just got so many recognitions at the awards luncheon. So, thank you, Sharice, and for those introductions and everybody participating today. I am pinch hitting for my colleague Carl Sims, who was supposed to be here today but was unable to. He usually does a lot of the presentations on this topic while I'm writing briefs for legislators and legislative staff who are wanting to pass universal licensure recognition in their state. So with that being said, if at any point I say something I shouldn't, but then I say backspace, then you can't hold it against me, whatever I said. All right? And I know that's very Gen Z of me to say, but moving on. So the Council of State Governments is the nation's only nonpartisan nonprofit organization which serves all three branches of state government. We're a regional-based forum where we bring in legislators to discuss ideas which ultimately foster the exchange of insights and ideas to help state officials shape policy, just like occupational licensure policy or work through interstate compacts. Ultimately, working to champion excellence in state governance and advancing the common good. Within the Council of State Governments exists the National Center for Interstate Compacts. We've worked for many, many years on the development of interstate agreements, but most recently our work has been done on occupational licensure compacts like the PT Compact. But with that work has naturally led us into being the subject matter experts of occupational licensure policy for CSG, and that has brought us big time to the attention of universal licensure recognition laws. These laws are streamlined licensure recognition policy amongst multiple professions within a state. Like the PT Compact, or a reciprocity agreement may be specific to one profession. ULR governs multiple different professions. They likely build off existing out-of-state licensure recognition laws. I'll most notably note licensure recognition laws for military spouses. Also with telehealth laws have been a great motivator just to build upon those laws already and to do that universally for all licensees. And like I said, it'll apply to multiple professions in a state, not just one, and usually not limited to specific groups like military spouses. And they provide a level of consistent policy for different professions. So those ULR laws, as they do apply to different professions, they're going to be consistent for professions too. Boards still might have some of their some autonomy with that, depending on the structure of the laws, but it's the same laws essentially for all professions. So a few things on what is ULR not? What is maybe some misconceptions on universal licensure recognition laws. ULR does not provide for true reciprocity. And what I mean by that is simply it's all imports, no exports, right? So if I'm licensed in a state with ULR laws in place, it doesn't do anything for me because I can't use that ULR law to go into a different state. It only permits licensees from other states to come in to my state with ULR laws in place. Like I mentioned, they may not apply to every profession. I'm going to get into this a little later, but one commonality of universal licensure recognition laws are that they will only apply to professions which are, and I don't want to make this seem like this is concrete for all ULR laws, but it is common functionality, that they may only apply to professions which are governed under a Department of Professional Licensing or regulation. So I know a good example for you all may be if your PT board is under a greater state health association, an allied health board, there's a chance universal licensure recognition laws may not apply to your profession if it's separate from that main entity of professional licensing. ULR is also, as we'll see through later in the presentation, it's not uniform across states. These licensure laws differ rather significantly as far as the requirements and the procedures for regulators to follow. And they also do not prevent the need for other licensure recognition policies, such as, such as interstate compacts or reciprocity laws for military families or bilateral reciprocity agreements. One important note here is that one of the main takeaways from this is universal licensure recognition laws may come about in your state. It is very important to have exemptions for these specific entities, such as, I'll give you guys probably the best example with the PT compact. If you have the PT compact in your state and a ULR law comes about, if there's no exemption, there are examples from where it's been interpreted that an individual coming in on a compact privilege may have further requirements than what's in the compact if that state also has universal licensure recognition laws. And those laws, the specificities and requirements of those universal licensure recognition laws may possibly apply to someone coming in with compact privilege. And then, but the best way around that, and I've talked to a few people with ULR coming about in their state, is to integrate exemptions, to exempt someone with a compact license from having to follow the ULR laws. And that's been done in a number of states and to real success. So here we'll see states with universal licensure recognition laws. We see they're growing. This list was much shorter just 2 years ago, as I'll show you all later. A few things I'll note on here: Nevada, Wyoming, New Mexico, maybe others are not PT compact member states. So if individuals in those states, are interested in, or there's licensees interested in coming into those states, even though you don't have a compact, this can be another alternate practice for some of those states. So now I'm going to get into some of the common policy features which are in ULR laws. And I want to note here that these are definitely not to be seen as consistent or concrete policies. These are just common functionalities we see in some universal licensure recognition laws. And I'm going to delve into these now. One, I'm sure talking with professional regulators, something you all are very well aware of, is the difference between shall and may. So just like in the PT compact and just like in most regulatory law, universal licensure recognition laws do have that shall clause, which is just important to note there. Now here's some of the big burdens I'm going to get into for regulators dealing with universal licensure recognition laws. What is somewhat common in universal licensure recognition laws is specifying that the license held by an out-of-state applicant be equivalent to the level of practice or scope of practice in the state they're coming into. So if I have universal licensure recognition in Kansas, and someone comes in from Nevada through universal licensure recognition, it's up to the regulator there in Kansas to identify what the scope of practice is, and if that is in Nevada, where that licensee is coming from, and note if that is substantially similar to what's in Kansas. And another note here, even though it does have this similar requirement with scope of practice laws, the scope of practice through ULR law still remains where the client is that you are treating. So you still have to abide by, just like in the compact, abide by the scope of practice where that patient is for that. And I think this is something as we'll get into, and it's the same with this next requirement coming up. I think this is work as these laws grow. Groups like FSBPT and you all could come together to make this burden easier for regulators in your state identifying these similar scope of practice and substantially equal requirements for licensure. Just like with the scope of practice requirement, this substantially equal requirements, it's on the regulator to determine if the requirements for licensure are substantially equal in the state where that licensee is coming from into your state. So that, just like with the scope of practice requirement, an additional kind of burden on that regulator. Additional required examinations. This allows, just like in the PT Compact, it's common for your all's profession, I assume, to have jurisprudence exams. So the PT Compact allows for that, and just like in some universal licensure recognition laws, this might not be as pertinent for PT, but I know, like with state-specific exams, it can also include those. Like for real estate agents, there may be a state-specific exam there, and that ULR provision would allow those to still be required. As talked about earlier, applicable occupations and professions. You might have ULR in your state, but it may not apply to your profession. It is probably the most common exclusion would be healthcare professions, which are not under that main Department of Professional Licensing. This is the one, and I want to say, we put it in here because it is a common, or not common, but it is a requirement we see. It's extremely rare, and I think a little bit counteractive of the part of the policy, the reasoning behind ULR laws. And it's a requirement that out-of-state licensee establish resident in the new state and receive that licensure. I think, for the onus of trying to move people wanting to move into a state, this expedites the process a bit, but it's really very far away from true reciprocity. But as I want to say, that's very, very rare. This requirement is. So a lot of the background that we have at CSG on occupational licensure policy came from a grant we worked on with the U.S. Department of Labor on helping licensure reciprocity amongst states to continue on the work we'd done with interstate compacts. So we have a survey here of the first few states which enacted universal licensure recognition laws, and kind of getting their feedback on how that experience has been for them. I want to note something really quick. We see 7 states on here. These are the first 7. And all of the states which had universal licensure recognition by the time we put together this survey, with that 7 states, and we look at the map here, and just in 2 years, you see how much that has grown. So this is a really strong growing kind of phenomenon and new policy in the states. And if it's not in your state yet, you likely can expect at least discussions on that very soon. And then just a quick plug here, our compacts.csg.org. For more resources on this, feel free to check out our website and the materials we have on this. To sum up my portion of the presentation, I'm going to go through some of those survey results really quick. Some of the benefits that were received in the survey, we had a bunch of respondents strongly agreed that ULR positively contributed to their state's overall workforce. It built their workforce numbers in their states, allowing those people to come in. They also cited improved efficiency and time to licensure. It's more effective, essentially, than an individual applying for a whole new license, being able to expedite that process through ULR laws. And then these policies probably, would achieve greater success for professions that are highly standardized. I think, PT would fall into that category, but like we said, with scope of practice and requirements, it's equivalent requirements, those can be difficult if those aren't standardized across states for licensing boards to note that. And that brings us on to some of the concerns. Confusion of how these work with compacts and current reciprocity agreements, and also military spouse provisions, how those work together. And I just want to reiterate, I think especially for this group, the importance of exemptions in those ULR laws. And it's important to note here, if this, as these come up in your state, you might, and you're a PT compact member state, there may not be many other more compacts that have been enacted in your state, which would put a lot of the onus on you to say, hey, legislator, hey, policymaker, we need an exemption for compacts here. This could be problematic for us if we don't have it, and there may not be many professions screaming that like you all would. Like we said earlier, issues with identifying the substantially similar requirements and scope of practice, and then I think that ultimately leads to implementation challenges. So another question that's been raised is how does universal recognition affect the compact? Short answer is typically universal recognition, telehealth registration laws, they don't affect the PT compact in any way. The compact is still highly beneficial, as the individual must maintain those renewal requirements for only one home license and does not incur the same cost of licensure. Compact also cuts down on the individual having to fill out multiple applications for multiple jurisdictions. One thing that universal recognition, telehealth registration, and compacts all do is treat individuals with treating them equal to push that licensure recognition through. And now, with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and I'll hand it over to Craig Millett.
All right, well, Grant, thank you very much for giving us that information. So one thing that we're really, really good at when we come to this meeting is to give you more terms and more terms and more terms. And then we usually say, but there's variability too. So, right, so those are their popular things. So when we're talking about portability here and the ability to treat patients across state lines, you know, there's a lot to deal with. So Grant has already hit on some of the main benefits that exist there as far as the PT/PTA maintaining their renewal requirement in the one home state. It does save them that financial cost. It would limit their need to have to fill out multiple applications. There's reduced barriers working across jurisdictional lines for those that share boundaries with other jurisdictions. And especially with sharing the information with the ELDD as an example, right? There's enhanced public protection because we're sharing that information across the jurisdictions. And I can't remember that statistic, but so close to real time, like 30 minutes or something from one state when it's reported and goes out. So I mean, those are huge benefits with the PT Compact. So with that, we had put together with the Ethics and Legislation Committee a resource that would be available to everybody through the public. I'm going to show you how you can get to it. So on the landing page, you can still go to free resources. Many of you have seen that area in the past. There are, go to the free resources. Let's see here. Where is that? Yep, and then to regulatory, yep. And then once you get onto the regulatory area, you can go to the right-hand side and look for the universal recognition laws and telehealth registries. And that will give you some more information on the specifics in order to get to the alternate paths to legal practice. There was a note that we had in here before. We talked about alternate pathways to licensure on this particular slide. And it's really these alternate paths to legal practice so that you can provide treatment to patients. So this is what it would look like if you go to the resource. The universal licensure recognition section does paint a picture of what universal recognition means, as well as many of the key issues and how proponents of universal recognition view that pathway, and what applicants or licensees would still need to do, as Grant alluded to some of those earlier, in order to be eligible, and what action steps they may need to take. Within the resource, there's a table. We've mentioned 19 jurisdictions that have that. So this is just the first 3 in alphabetical order, so there's no preference or that. But you can see, if you look at the different columns between, is there a residency requirement, as Grant mentioned? Is there the substantial or similar equivalency requirement? Is there a TOEFL for endorsement, TOEFL for initial licensure? You can see we have 3 different jurisdictions, and none of the 3 of them match. So you could kind of carry that on down the list of the 19 jurisdictions, and again, variability is one of those famous words we like to use. But it is a helpful resource if you're not sure about your jurisdiction, right? This gives you some of that information. And if it is a jurisdiction where you're considering or you're aware of universal licensure recognition coming into play, where does your jurisdiction currently land? I know Steve's going to go over in much more detail the telehealth registry that was mentioned earlier. So I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but I will point out that in the resource document that I alluded to, it's basically broken down into 3 sections. There's a section on universal recognition, there's a section on telehealth, and a section on the compact. So that way you have some description of what each of those means compared to one another. However, I will just point out that there is an excellent description of telehealth and why changes have occurred to have this recognition out there. And then there are some very specific state highlights, as well as other covered healthcare professionals such as the veterans. So for example, in the telehealth, in the document, it does talk about how veterans and PTs who are working for the VA can be treated. And essentially, if you are a PT working with the VA and you are treating a patient of the VA from a telehealth standpoint, you basically are exempt from that individual particular state. So as it states that they would not be held to the laws regarding out-of-state providers when providing services as an employee of the Veterans Administration. So it is an interesting little carve out there from the telehealth standpoint. The section that really gets into addressing information about the compact has some very good resources that are available to you. A couple of them are up on the slide for you, but it really does talk about how your individual jurisdiction can benefit from the compact, some of which were alluded to by Grant earlier. It does also give some support to how PT graduates of the non-CAPTE accredited programs are more appropriately managed, or at least considered to be managed for your jurisdiction. The resources that are there are good for you to be able to click through. There are some other click-throughs higher up in the document as well. These are at the end of the document. But just as with many of the other FSBT PT resources, that resource is helpful to you as regulators. It's helpful for licensees who may be considering maybe moving, relocating, if you're living close to boundaries, if you're going to provide services via telehealth. What is out there and available for you in order to have the ability to practice legally to provide care to individuals in various jurisdictions. The universal process, as Grant mentioned earlier, is very, very important in order for there to be that substantial equivalency. There is great variability, as we know exists from the earlier example that I gave you with the first 3 states. Within the document, it does go into individual states that have telehealth registries, but for further detail on that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Steve and let him go through that information for you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go off script here for just a little bit. Anti-technology farm boy Slido poll. Professionals in the room who have actually performed a telehealth visit, just raise your hand. Great, wonderful to see. Okay, professionals in the room who've done a telehealth visit. Any of you a part of a telehealth registry? Raise your hand. We have one. Okay. Okay, great. Well, hopefully you'll learn a little bit about that. I'm going to channel my inner Leslie, Adrienne, and I'm going to make your life easier. I'm going to be talking about a telehealth policy paper, and it is in your hand in your phone. So if you go to the schedule for this meeting, and you go to the description of this class, this area, and you go and under the description, telehealth policy paper, it's underlined, and there's a link to that there, and you can download the 24-page telehealth policy paper and read that, and I will assume if you're looking at the phone when I'm talking that you're reading that. However, just to let you know, there will be an executive summary for this coming out soon, and it's like a 1 3/4, almost 1.5 page hook. So you'll read that, get a really good summary of that, and we'll go from there, but I'm also going to give you kind of the Steve notes of it as well. So I'm going to take you the rest of the way here, and off we go. So the ethics and legislation, this year we've been focused on the telehealth policy paper, but what do need to recognize that this was first published in 2015, and the committee members are there for that. And when telehealth in 2015, it was not a new concept. And there's some audience members here. Joni, you were working on that as well. And so our current committee would like to give kudos to this original committee for their work. They did a fantastic job in creating a document that stood the test of time, even through COVID. And so when it took us through that global pandemic and it was more highly utilized I'm going to mess around here with these little things and get my notes down. You know what, with COVID, we did know the new challenges that it brought. You know, we learned a lot during that period of time very rapidly for that. And so the committee, in performing its insight and review of it and the updates, realized instead of starting from scratch, we were going to use it as a springboard and go forward. So we took that and gave some additional insights. So our committee sought input from a variety of different stakeholders and looked at the current statutes and other regulations, legislative initiatives, other healthcare professionals may have been doing in this area, and we reviewed a lot of literature, including what the APTA put out as well. And this document, the digitally enhanced physical therapist foundational paper, anybody read that? Okay, very good. I know the nerds in the room, thank you. I'm right there with you. Well, it was published in November, so if you didn't raise your hand, I do encourage you to take it. It's worth your time. It's a good read, but read FSBPTs first. And then we did look at other currently information in there, and we brought that into our document as well. And our committee on the final telehealth policy paper, it was approved by the board of directors, and it's located on the website there. It's also in your hand, but if you go to free resources and download the telehealth policy, it's there for you as well for that. So, all right. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the updates in the telehealth policy paper, and a couple of things like Craig alluded to is a lot more terms, more definitions of that. And one important update was to define digital practice and telehealth. And we wanted to make sure that, digital practice, what is that? Well, it's a term that's used to describe telehealth services, support and information provided via digital communication and devices. The term digital practice encompasses the term telehealth and is more representative now the new variety of tools that we have augmenting our physical therapy practice today, including wearable technology. And if you haven't seen some of that wearable technology, super cool, cutting edge stuff. Some AI enhanced platforms, as well as apps to help with delivering physical therapy services. So we incorporated the updated definition of the telehealth from the 7th edition of the Model Practice Act, as well, into the paper as well, and touched on how COVID-19 pandemic brought on that exponential expansion and the use of telehealth, including some policy changes that were also put into place during that time. So the emphasis continues that telehealth, and just say this again, telehealth is not a new treatment or expansion in the scope of service or the practice of physical therapy, but is a mode of delivering skilled care to those in need. So with all telehealth practice platform standards of care, laws and regulations currently required to be followed for any in-person visit must also be followed for any encounter via telehealth. So just wanted to make sure that that was extremely clear. Additionally, the updated paper that you have in your hand is a way to show that advancements in telehealth are seemingly outpacing our regulatory requirements. We saw that during COVID, and it continues. And different issues arose during the pandemic that were included into the update, and that was the verification of the identity of the patient and who you're speaking with, the location of the patient, and verification of where they are physically at the start of each and every visit, informed consent, and when does the beginning of a provider-patient relationship begin with using these digital modes of communication. Some clinical guidelines were updated also as well. Welcome to Florida. If you haven't figured that out, that's where you are at now. And wanted to kind of highlight Florida, some advancements in telehealth that were seemingly outpacing our regulatory requirements and assumptions and licensure policies. Other jurisdictions started to explore some other avenues of using this digital practice in other ways to deliver services in their jurisdiction. And so it's good to be mindful with any type of, the use of telehealth as it expands, as we do any type of regulation. It's good to be mindful that mandates for in-person visits or supervisory visits with regulations, although well-intentioned, may inhibit the potential use and availability of telehealth. It may hinder that use for our patients that are needing our physical therapy services. Now, the current physical therapy licensure system, it's inconsistent with the application requirements and limited licensure portability, and create potential barriers in providing physical therapy services remotely. So to solve this, those jurisdictions have enacted some other avenues towards telehealth to be provided in their jurisdiction. And the one that you see in here is that of Florida, with being one example of this. And this is a screenshot from their website, and it's talking about their registry process. And that's what we have in Florida. So what's a telehealth registry? So legislative efforts have been created to allow providers without a license in Florida to provide telehealth care in that jurisdiction, and to legally provide those services in that jurisdiction. And of course, there's variations in the jurisdictions that have created this, and some of them have that. Some of the laws that are out there and some of the jurisdictions have limited time frames or other jurisdictions. But it's just a way for someone in another jurisdiction to provide care via telehealth registry without a license in that home jurisdiction for that. So off to another technological Slido poll. Question for you guys. How many states have currently enacted a telehealth registry? See if you knew. Wow. Oh, we're split. I like it. Which means they haven't Googled the answer yet. That's great. They could have done that or used AI. Nice to know that they didn't. Copy and paste. I don't know. 60 people in the room, 34. All right, we're getting there. think we're there. A little, I don't. Some people are still going. Yeah. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but the majority is wrong. The answer is 6 current registries for that, but really good. So if you got 6, great guess for that. Obviously, I alluded to one is in Florida. Arizona, has established a shall collect fee, right? There you go. Delaware allows healthcare providers to obtain interstate telehealth registration. Florida has that there. Kansas has a waiver issued by the Board of the Healing Arts. Vermont, licensure registration is available. And West Virginia, registration does not authorize the person's services, but makes healthcare providers subject to the jurisdiction of the board. So 6. And for more updates on that, you can take a look at the cross-state licensing there at that link there for there. All right, well, I'm going to take it over to Cherise and let her finish some things up.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to have a few minutes left for you all to be able to ask our panel of experts some questions, but we had one last Slido you see here. If you feel that you're any more comfortable than before, wait for a few more. Some of you still pretty uncomfortable, but the great thing is now all you have to do is go to that resource and read all about it, and then call 1-800-LESLIE-ADRIAN if you have any question. Just kidding. All right, and then we'll end on this slide and go ahead and do some questions before we give you the QR code to do the evaluation, but we just wanted to also give you Grant's contact information, just in case you had any more questions about the information he presented for the Council of State Governments. And I do suggest looking on that website. It's a really thorough and great resource. So we'll go ahead and open it up to anyone that has questions for our panel, and if you do, please raise your hand, and Ms. Charlotte in the front has her hand raised. And you guys can turn it on, just please.
Hi, I beat Charlotte. This is Judith from Louisiana. So my quick question is, since Louisiana's a compact state, is there a reason why we would want to have a telehealth registry?
You do it. Or I can talk about it. The intent of the telehealth registry is to look at the ability to deliver that service to someone who would engage in that that type of service. And when you're looking at workforce, if there's an area that there's just not timeliness of care or access to care, and you perceive in your jurisdiction that having providers or experts in other areas of the country providing telehealth registry, that could be a benefit. In Florida, so I'm from Minnesota, we have snowbirds, right? Those are people that go in Minnesota and they drive down and they live in the villages, drive golf course all the time, and then they come back up to Minnesota. And so those folks, we have therapists in Minnesota that have telehealth registries in Florida that follow their patients via that way and continue their care. And it really just enhances their care for that, even though they're not licensed in Florida, and it really can make a huge difference there that way. If that's occurring in Louisiana and New Orleans, that would be something that definitely be enhancing for your jurisdiction to look at.
Now, I'll just add too that I think that the overriding theme of being able to have these different potential avenues is accessibility, right? I mean, how can patients, clients receive the services that we can provide so that we can either rehabilitate them, we can help with prevention, health and wellness, so it affords different avenues to be able to bring the care to them.
This is Charlotte from Louisiana. For the states that have universal recognition of licensure, The problem or the challenge that I see is the substantial equivalent piece. Have y'all had difficulty with determining if other states are substantially equivalent? Because that's the only real challenge that I see. As you might say today we're equivalent, but then you have a law change. So, is it equivalent right now? Was it equivalent at the time that they were licensed? All of those questions come up at our board, and it's very challenging. And in my mind, I'm like, well, all the states are kind of substantially equivalent because they all require the national board exam. So is that the position that those states are taking, or do y'all look at all the requirements at the time of application whenever y'all are, or do y'all know what the process is?
We're deferring to Leslie Adrian. She has her hand up.
So there's two different levels. There's substantially equivalent and there's similarly equivalent. So similarly equivalent is a lesser bar than substantially equivalent. Now, truthfully, Charlotte, we actually have it pretty easy, you guys. Like PTs, for the most part, your requirements are pretty much the same. Yes, there's like nuances in people's laws more with regard to scope of practice than typically licensure requirements. Now, where you do have some issues and some variation tends to be with foreign educated PTs and PTAs. However, if you're a compact state, guess what? That ship has sailed, my friend. So keep that in mind. But honestly, pretty much, no, every state is going to require that they were educated and that they passed the test. Those are pretty much the big bars, right? So, and then when you look at scope of practice, there are slight variations. For the most part, they look the same from state to state. Now, if you want to see somebody who has done all of this work for you, go to Utah's website. They've done it all. They've taken, and they've done it for every single occupation that they license. So it is clear as day. And you could take yours and then just use what they've done with the other states. If this is something that just, you feel like you really have to do the work to compare them, I mean, Utah has done it all. It's pretty amazing. It's like a couple years worth of work that they did to get that done. But again, look at your law, because if your law states substantially equivalent, that is a different hurdle than if it says similarly equivalent. And what we have to realize is that these laws typically apply to a broad range of licensed or regulated occupations. So you're talking about electricians and all the way to physicians. So it's a huge range of things, and so you can't think about them just in the PT silo, because none of these are just a PT universal recognition law statute. So, and then the other thing, I want to put a plug in for for Council of State Governments. Some of you in compact states will have, or some of you who have universal recognition laws that don't have compacts yet will be told, why do you need a compact if we have this universal recognition law? But they aren't the same. And the thing to bring up is that they are complementary. It doesn't have to be one or the other. They're complementary pieces of legislation that are helpful in different ways. And CSG has a fabulous document that basically says, compacts and universal recognition laws, how are they the same, how are they different, and how can they work together? So your argument is laid out for you in that document. It's great. So,
as it is in the alternate paths to practice document as well. We have a lot of your information in there. Another question? We have 1 minute left, so we'll take one more question. No? Anybody? Uh-oh, Nancy?
I know military has exemption where you don't have to be licensed in every jurisdiction. How does it work with athletes, whether professional or collegiate? I was always curious, when a team travels from one state to another, is the providers licensed, or is there an exemption for athletes? Does anybody know?
It depends on the state.
Yeah, you can look at, it goes by state statute, but typically, and in the Model Practice Act, there is an exemption for providers that travel with sports teams and performing arts So
And that is in the model. It is, but
that's what I said, that each state has to look in your
Yeah.
own, but there is an exemption. Many states have that exemption in their law right now, but the model language is there if that's something that you're interested in adding. It's in the, and that's considered the gold standard of regulation, that exemption, so.
Right, and looking at that, we discuss in the Model Practice Act, or put out in the Model Practice Act, that, there can be time limits that can be, considered, how long is the individual in the state, and it's, addressing their particular sports team, right? So it's not giving them ability to treat anybody carte blanche in the state, right? It's generally specific to their particular sports team.
all right, well, unfortunately, Nancy, we ran out of time. So we'll stay after for your question.
Oh yeah, come on up, Nancy, we'll talk to you.
And go ahead and take a second to fill out our little evaluation. We really thank you all for taking the time to come today.